Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I note none of my other colleagues didn't check in with you, but earlier this morning you said you weren't feeling that well. No. Are you feeling better now?
I see why it's your favorite. You're the only one that cares. See why you're my favorite?
That's it.
And they don't care.
You get actually 20 minutes.
You get 10 for that.
We'll work on them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my debate contribution on the mid-year budget, the supplemental budget, and I'm thankful for having 30 minutes. Madam Speaker, in the past I've gotten up on this side of the House. This is the opposition side of the House. I know there's some backbenchers, but the opposition sits on this side. It's my job to oppose what the government puts forward, Madam Speaker. That may correct their course, or that may give them content to consider going forward. One of my first contributions in this honourable House, Madam Speaker, I had brought up the Naval Academy that is now receiving such great attention from the Honourable Minister Bowe, and I'm very pleased that Oleg, yes. I'm very pleased, Madam Speaker, that it's being seen as another industry by the member from West Grand Bahama and Bimini. This last week, I was fortunate enough to attend a charter and yacht show that was held here in Nassau Harbor. I think the first, if not in recent years, the first ever. I understand that members from the future opposition side, Chester Cooper, the government side, Madam Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister, Chester Cooper was there, and I also understand that former stateswoman Loretta Butler Turner also was in attendance. But you had the young maritime cadets there. I met a young man by the name of Mr. Adderley, and I think that it's opening up great channels for them to not only contribute to the yachting industry here, but more importantly, the maritime industry around the world. So I'm really looking forward to the results, those records being set by female and male graduates. Madam Speaker, but I'm going to say some things today that probably won't be received in the same manner that they've been given, because I'm going to give an opposition's contribution, Madam Speaker. It's typical of my fashion, maybe to surf the line, and I hear the local John F. Kennedy are already piping up over there, so I can imagine a voice note may follow this as it's done before. That's his prerogative. But Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I didn't know the PLPs was talking about me like that, Madam Speaker. I thought they had the people's business to take care of. Madam Speaker, I heard some of the things that the Prime Minister brought up this morning. I actually, truthfully, don't recall what they were right now. Nothing really blew me away. But when I wrote this down, I was at my breakfast, my dinner table, my lunch table, my dining table today, having, I think my wife, one of these days in the month, she makes me breakfast. I think I had a waffle. I had a waffle with scrambled eggs and hot dog. That's my youngest son's favorite, so I was fortunate to be in the company of my youngest son, and I got fed this morning. But I then sat down and wrote this out, and I'm just going to go through it now, Madam Speaker. The first thing that stuck out to me was what has this government done since last year? What has this government done since last year, since we had their first supplemental budget debate. Madam Speaker, what has this government done since last year? They've held parties, they've distributed money, and they've flown away. While Bahamian people are struggling, this government has been holding parties, distributing money, and flying away. I'm being serious when I ask, what have they done? I considered giving my same debate contribution presentation from last year today. I could have almost taken that off of my computer and gone over the same things, Madam Speaker, and not much had changed. The only parts I would have needed to change were the casualties, the persons who have innocently lost their lives on the streets. We still have casualties today, Madam Speaker, but they're not the same individuals. There are still unaddressed issues with the supplementary budget. There are unaddressed issues with social services. There are unaddressed issues with land use planning and land use policies. And there are also unaddressed issues with renewable energy targets. Madam Speaker, these are things that are plaguing the country, and these are things that I had in my debate contribution last year. I've just heard the member from Garden Hills go through what the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture is doing. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, renovations at Thomas A. Robinson Stadium, new tracks, opportunities for athletes, not only in New Providence and in Grand Bahama. State-of-the-art, this might have been the Prime Minister, it might have been a member from Garden Hills, state-of-the-art baseball stadium. But you look at social services, Madam Speaker, and you look at the amount of money that's been put aside for persons, allocations for children with special needs, and there's not even $1 increase in the budget from last year to this year. And Madam Speaker, as a Rotarian, one of the local organizations that we participated with from time to time was the BAPD, which is the Bahamas Association for the Physically Disabled. That's where young persons with severe muscle growth disabilities go from a very young age so that they can have as much exposure to exercises and education that'll keep them as flexible as they could be. But once they turn 18, Madam Speaker, that's it. The Bahamas Association for the Physically Disabled no longer has them come to the facility. They no longer have exposure through any government program to any educational opportunities, Madam Speaker. Not $1 was added to the line item under this supplementary budget for allocation for children with special needs. We have to do better. Hopefully we can turn that around when the budget comes out in June, but we can't take persons that are going to BAPD for granted. It's only a few $100,000, Madam Speaker, that's allocated to these individuals. And it's not just the individuals at BAPD. It's got to be an array of individuals that are receiving the small portion of the money coming under this line item. Madam Speaker, I think it was roughly $300,000. It's not very much at all, Madam Speaker. In addition, Madam Speaker, we have the issues with land use planning that are impacting the country and land use policies. Under the Planning and Subdivision Act, this is something that I said last year, under the Planning and Subdivision Act, the law requires the production of a land use plan and land use policies. Now, when this was raised last year, I think the Honorable Minister, the member from Fort Charlotte, said, well, we're going to change the law. We're going to bring an amendment. A year's gone by, Madam Speaker, and that amendment has not come. I have also described in other opportunities to give contributions in this House how we kind of operate from a planning side with the cart in front of the horse. We don't have a plan that we're following, and until we have land use plans and the land use policies called for under the Act, we're going to continue to operate backwards, Madam Speaker. There was a renewable energy target. I had mentioned this last year. There was a renewable energy target where we would have dependency on 30% of renewable energy sources by 2030. Last year, the budget line item for renewable energy, Madam Speaker, would have been, I think, 500,000. Energy restoration and renewable energy. 2022, 2023, 500,000. Supplemental estimates for 2022, 2023, minus 250,000. Overall revised allocation for 2022, 2023, 250,000. So if you thought that this country was going in the direction of meeting its target commitment of 30% renewable energy by 2030, and you looked at a nominal amount of $500,000 to achieve that for the year, you probably were in complete disbelief like I was. Now to come and find out and go through this telephone book size document and then see that not only has it not been increased, but it's been decreased by 250,000. Madam Speaker, there are issues plaguing our country, and renewable energy is one of those. Madam Speaker, there are still unaddressed issues with social services, and as I said, land use planning, land use policies, renewable energy targets that are hurting our communities. So social services, if you have persons that are in need of school uniform allowance, that went away. It's not back in the budget. If you have family members that have special needs and you think maybe this will be the year that my 12-year-old child can attend some of the classes at one of the few facilities that offer lessons for children with special needs, but find out the government didn't care enough to increase the allocation for children with special needs, and sorry, it's just going to be another tough year. You see that childhood of that individual, that loved one in your family disappearing, Madam Speaker, and it's real. All right, it's tough, difficult enough to raise children, it's challenging enough, it's trying enough to raise children that don't have disability. But to have one child with disability, Madam Speaker, some families are even doing their best to care for households that have 2 children with disability in them. And to see, it must not be what's in the members' hearts, Madam Speaker, but for some reason, when Cabinet sits down and determines what they're going to be allocating money to, they have not yet determined that children with special needs are worth any more money today than they were 6 months, than they were 1 year ago. Madam Speaker, this renewable energy target is impacting and hurting our communities because until we can step away from the dependency on the crude oil that we're bringing in and have access to the natural energy sources that our oceans, that our exposure to the sun provide, our electricity bills are going to continue to be higher than they need to be. We made a commitment as a country to 30% dependency on renewables by 2030. We can only be seen as stepping away from that with the fact that we've gone from a $500,000 allocation to a $250,000 allocation. And as if that weren't enough, Madam Speaker, there are now serious issues that must be addressed on immigration, on the ease of doing business, on public prosecutions. Madam Speaker, on immigration, some say we have a crisis, some say we have irregular migration going on right now, but when you look at the overall immigration budget, despite the difficult circumstances, the budget has gone down by $40,000, Madam Speaker. I can't see how you're bringing in the troops, how you're going to address a national issue, and you reduce the budget that you had previously set when you didn't acknowledge there was a crisis, or when you didn't acknowledge that there was a migration issue, and when you didn't acknowledge that you're going to have an immigration task force. How do you reduce the budget? Now, if this budget was set a month ago, before the Prime Minister's national address that night on that stage, with the dark shadow behind him. Madam Speaker, I could see we didn't realize that we were going to prioritize this. But this budget has been presented in the House last week. It was moved by the Prime Minister of this great country today, and it was seconded by a great constituent of St. Anne's, the gentleman who represents South Andros, Mr. Lundy. Again, this is something like the budget item for children with special needs that has got to be addressed when we come back on the budget in June. And we'll have an hour's time, Madam Speaker. All members of Parliament have an hour's time then. The Leader of the Opposition has 2 hours. The mover, if it's the Prime Minister, he seems to have as much time as he wants, Madam Speaker, but the seconder and ministers, I think, will have 2 hours. Madam Speaker, we have an immigration issue, we have an ease of doing business issue, and we have a public prosecutions issue.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
I'm getting a report that the members being seen on TV, but no, there's no audio. Could that be checked, please?
Yeah, it is still consistent all day.
Speaker, we received the same report, Madam Speaker. We've been checking periodically, but we are told that the audio is perfect. I think in some areas might be a feed difficulty, but generally here and in this general environment appears to be okay. But we'll continue to check, Madam Speaker. We'll continue to check to make sure. With television, here and other places, I've checked in Grand Bahama. I've checked in Grand Bahama. I've also checked here in New Providence to make sure.
Okay. I understand that Cable Bahamas is working perfectly, but the is it free to air? Free to air is where we have the issue.
So, Madam Speaker, we have these new serious issues, not the ones that I can repeat from last year, but these new serious issues, this immigration issue. With the immigration budget, there's an immigration task force, but the budget's gone down by 40,000. I don't know if we're incorporating a lot of prayer into this game plan, but when you reduce the resources, you generally reduce the results. Madam Speaker, we'll see what comes of it. The next budget's coming up in June. They know what they can do. The ease of doing business, Madam Speaker, as well as public prosecutions. Public prosecutions, Madam Speaker, we have a backlog of court cases. We have a backlog of court cases, Madam Speaker. We have persons that are out on bail committing offenses while out on bail. We have persons that are being released while charged with murder because they're not being brought to court in a reasonable amount of time. But you look at the budget for public prosecutions, Madam Speaker, and originally it was approved at $3,279,627. There's a supplemental adjustment to it, Madam Speaker, of going down. The budget for public prosecutions has gone down by $519,898. So again, immigration, national issue, gone down by 40,000. Public prosecutions, national issue, gone down by over 500,000. I ask the question again, Madam Speaker, what have they done besides holding parties, distributing money, and flying away? Madam Speaker, for the love of democracy, the Senate has not met since it was the year 2022. In over 2 months, the Minister of Legal Affairs, the Minister of Economic Affairs have not been to work in Parliament. No bill passes through Parliament until it has been approved both by the upper chamber, the Senate, as well as the lower chamber, the House of Assembly. Members of the public must know that they have elected a government that is in idle. In Parliament, this government has entered 2023 not going forward, not going in reverse, just idling, Madam Speaker. Idling. We are in the boat with an idle government at the helm. Is it not pathetic to be idle, Madam Speaker? Is it not pathetic to lock up peaceful civilians? When CARICOM was in town, Lincoln Bain and a number of other Bahamians were taken into custody, their freedoms trampled, stuffed into a vehicle, stripped from the place they belonged. Is it not pathetic to fail at the ease of doing business index so much that you can't resolve an online portal glitch at the Register General's Department in over 6 months? First, the word on the street was that access to the online title documents went down because of a non-payment. Then the talk was it went down because there was a discovery of fraudulent recordings. Now the paper is saying that the AG is looking at a new civil registry platform. This sounds like another case of cut, cancel, and abuse, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
The member in his profession would well know that the integrity of our financial system depends on the integrity of the registry. And I would much prefer if he speak facts and not what the word is on the street. We don't want to put that in the atmosphere, Madam Speaker. He knows better, so I'm asking him to please stick with the facts. If he has a question, he can pose that question during notices, and one of us will be sure to get back to him.
Thank you, honourable member.
Madam Speaker, if the Deputy Prime Minister would then tell me that this following statement is not a fact. The paper reported that the AG has said that the matter is beyond our control. The issues with the online title portal, Madam Speaker, are beyond our control. So if he wants to tell me that I shouldn't say anything negative, when you have the chief legal officer in this nation acknowledging that something is beyond his control, by association beyond the control of cabinet, and Madam Speaker, I don't think that he needs to worry about the few little things that I hear and say I've heard on the street. Beyond our control. Step aside. Other people ready to lead. Cut, cancel, and abuse. Cut, cancel, and abuse, Madam Speaker. Bread on the table for children is now being taxed under this administration. That's another case of cut, cancel, and abuse. Feminine hygiene products have been taxed. That's another case. That's another, everybody's chuckling over there because I bet you none of them chuckling buying any of those products. Feminine hygiene products, Madam Speaker, are taxed. Feminine hygiene products, Madam Speaker, are taxed. Another case of cut, cancel, and abuse. 50 years in, and we are witnessing an administration that taxes women and children. 50 years in, and we are witnessing islands still without a water supply. 50 years in, and islands that have water supply are living like the well run dry. There's constant disruptions in Central and South Eleuthera. Our school even had to close, Madam Speaker, because they had no water supply. I watched a recent video on social media where a grown, bald-headed man was complaining because he was in Eleuthera and had to bathe in a 5-gallon jug. Now, Madam Speaker, I don't know how this bald head was going to squeeze through the nozzle of that 5-gallon bottle so he could bathe in it, but I expect he was forced to have a cowboy bath or a bush shower. That's where you get the bag of water, the plastic bag of water, poke a few holes, and you dance underneath it, Madam Speaker, to try to get all the corners and curves of your body. Madam Speaker, this foolishness has to stop. The parties and infrequent trips have to stop. The abuse of democracy. No bill is passed in Parliament in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in January or in February. No bill. We debated the midwives and nurses bill. That was the only one. I asked my colleagues in the Senate, how did your debate go on that? And they said, we haven't met since before the new year. And I realized that bill hasn't even come back to be passed here, Madam Speaker. But the foolishness has to stop. The parties, the frequent trips have to stop. The abuse of democracy has to stop.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Tall Pines.
Madam Speaker, point of order. The member for Science is misleading this House and the Bahamian people. The Nurses and Midwives Bill is at the committee stage. There's 2 or 3 potential amendments that are being discussed.
How is that misleading?
And because it's in the committee stage, it's not over to the other place. It's still here. No, but you said no bill. Second of all, the Mental Health Act is in play. It was passed, the bill was passed in this House. It went to the upper chamber, it was passed. The bill is enacted and it's about to go into force. So your information is incorrect.
Thank you, honourable member.
Madam Speaker, I didn't say anything about the Mental Health Act. The Senate has not met this year, Madam Speaker. It's been 2 months, Madam Speaker. I can understand there should be sensitivity over there, Madam Speaker. This is not meant to compliment them, Madam Speaker, and it goes to what I'm about to say. The comfortability of this administration to cruise idly has to stop. The pathetic arrests of citizens' civil liberties has to stop. The pathetic mismanagement of our gains in the ease of doing business has to stop. The pathetic tax on women and children has to stop. Madam Speaker, it is time for the Davis-Cooper administration to stop. This mid-year budget is going to carry them to the 2023 budget due in less than 6 months. When that budget comes, that will be the midway point in their administration. If they don't move from cancel, cut, and abuse, if they don't move from drifting and idle, the public will stop them at the next election. That's a fact. I'm not being critical, Madam Speaker. I'm being fair. Freetown wasn't here earlier on when I declared that I'll be doing my job, and that is providing an opposition point of view. I'm not flattering them. I'm not taking all the Kool-Aid off the budget meat shelf. I'm not PLP all the way. I'm not PLP anyway, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I'm being fair. I'm being fair to this government. I'm being fair to the people. After all, Madam Speaker, we are one country, our legacy, and our future. And, Madam Speaker, I was going to conclude right there, but I mean, I can't realize that the front bench didn't understand why I turned around to Leslia Miller-Bryce, the ambassador, the one that stood out in Rawson Square and announced to our nation that for this 50th anniversary, this Jubilee anniversary, that our theme for the year was going to be our legacy, one country, our legacy, our future. There's nothing funny about where we are, Madam Speaker. My theme is one country, our legacy, our future. And, Madam Speaker, my opinion is that the country deserves more. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. That's my contribution.